Hi, Year 5. Welcome to your RE lesson. So we are going to be continuing our big question, what did Jesus do to save human beings? So remember, have a little think from our lesson last week. We were talking about sacrifice. So what did Jesus do in terms of sacrifice? So remember, he sacrificed himself. He also sacrificed time. We could talk about that because he did a lot of good things with other people, and he made his whole life about saving human beings. So we're thinking of sacrifice broader than just his death. But today we're talking about his resurrection again. So our learning objective is, can I suggest meanings for the narratives of Jesus' death and resurrection? So you are going to talk about narratives. Remember, in English, when we talk about narratives, is a retelling of a story. So there are different versions of the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, and we're going to talk about the meanings for them, one in particular today. So why did Jesus die? We're going to be thinking about that. The lead up to Jesus' death, and what did his resurrection mean, or what does it mean to Christians? So we're going to be thinking about those today. Before I move on to the next slide, I need you to make sure you have your worksheet ready. You might need to pause the video. So it's the worksheet with a narrative on one side, and then on the other side it has an outline of a human being, and we're going to need some paper as well to make lots of notes. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera off now so you can really focus on everything I'm saying. Okay, so can I suggest meanings for narratives of Jesus' death and resurrection? So you need to write down notes on your narrative here. This is one of the narratives of his death and resurrection. And we need to link it to sacrifice, and we need to link it to Jesus' life. So remember, Jesus was a part of God. So God gave him powers, okay? He was a servant, and he acted in a servant way to God. What do I mean by that? Pause the video now and have a discussion. What do I mean by Jesus acting as a servant and acting in servant ways? So Christians believe that he was the Messiah. He was the king. He was the messenger. Jews believe that the Messiah was coming to save them against their oppression with the Romans. So at that time, we remember, think back to the big freeze, the story of the Old Testament moving into the New Testament. After creation, the fall, Adam and Eve are falling away from the snake. After the paint pots are part of the creation, all of God's creations. And there's a period of darkness. So this darkness is when people were sinning. They turned their backs on God. They were no longer following God's way. God wanted people to be kind and loving, but people were being selfish. Think to the story of Moses that we've talked about, how the Egyptians were treating them, the Israelites, and link that with sin. So think about the world as sinning. And then Jesus happened. Jesus was born. He was the light of the world. So Jesus, Christians believe he had the power of a king. But when we think of Jesus, do we think of him looking like how we expect a king to look like? So does he dress like a king? Does he act like a king? Pause the video now and have a discussion. Why did Jesus act the way he did? Why was he not a king? And remember, all his power. When you have lots of power, you can control things. You can control people. Think of people in our society that have got lots of power. They can be quite controlling. Have a discussion now. Why did Jesus decide not to be controlling? So pause the video and come back. Okay, so remember, Jesus was a leader, not a controller. He was a leader of the people. He was leading them to God's way, to be kind and loving. And that's why when we looked at the charities, Christians are trying to be kind and loving to other human beings. They are following God's way. So looking at this text here, why did Jesus sacrifice himself? Why did he have the ultimate sacrifice? What led up to that? Why was he God's servant? And then I want you to link this with ideas of freedom and justice. Did Jesus have freedom? Okay. Was he a free thinking person, or was he merely just a servant of God? What do you think about that? I want your ideas. Okay. So I'm going to read this now. You can pause if you need to for discussion of different aspects of this narrative. draw out lots of key vocab, link it with sacrifice, link it with resurrection, link it to being Jesus being humble and modest, why he didn't want to be a controller, why he didn't scream and shout that he was all powerful, okay, that he'd come to rescue the Jews. What would have happened if he did that? Think about that as well. What would the Romans have done? Which ended up happening to him anyway. So I'm going to start with number 1. You can read along with me. Who would have believed what we heard? Who saw the Lord's power in this? He grew up like a small plant before the Lord. Yeah, so do you think about that? Why have they compared him with a plant? Like a root growing in dry land. He had no special beauty or form to make us notice him. There was nothing in his appearance to make us desire him. So link this bit here that I've just read about him not looking like a normal king. Yeah, why he didn't look special? He looked very humble. When you think of Jesus, Christians portray him as being, he often quite wears just a plain, simple outfit, nothing fancy or special about him. Why is that? So, number 3, he was hated and rejected by people. He had much pain and suffering. People would not even look at him. He was hated and we didn't even notice him. So remember, people are still sinning now. They're not listening to him. They're still sinning. They're not being nice to him. But he took our suffering on him and he felt our pain for us. Think about sacrifice. How does that sentence there link to sacrifice? We saw his suffering and thought God was punishing him. But he was wounded for the wrong we did. He was crushed for the evil that we did. Does that link with resurrection, do you think? How can you link it? What are the wrongs? How was he crushed for their evil? So remember, I'm thinking about linking this to sin, linking this to people being selfish for their wrongdoing. Okay, so Jesus was there spreading God's words. He was trying to change their way, trying to lead them back to God. The punishment which made us well was given to him, and we are healed because of his wounds. So his wounds is to do with his sacrifice on the cross. Okay, he had physical wounds on his hands, remember, and it says we are healed. It means that, or Christians believe that, by Jesus sacrificing himself, it was fixing the relationship between people and God. It was repairing their relationship, bringing them back together. So God would forgive the people's sins if Jesus went on with the sacrifice. So, number 6, we'll have wandered away like sheep. Each of us has gone his own way rather than one way. The one way would be the way of God. But the Lord has put on him the punishment for all the evil we have done. Annotate there. What do you think that means? The Lord has put on him the punishment. What was the punishment? For the evil that we have done. What is the evil? Number 7. He was beaten down and punished, but he didn't say a word. Why? What kind of word? Imagine you were beaten down and punished. Would you say something? Would you shout back? Would you complain? Why did Jesus not say a word? He was like a lamb being led to be killed. He was quiet as a sheep is quiet while its wool is being cut. He never opened his mouth. How does that link to being him being a servant to God? Have a think about that. Men took him away roughly and unfairly. Who are these men? Are they Jews or are they Romans? He died without children to continue his family. Is that fair? Think about freedom and justice there. Do you think Jesus had any freedom to say whether he would be able to have children? Or was his life purely for God? Do you think that's fair? He was put to death. He was punished for the sins of my people. Number 9, he was buried with wicked men and he died with the rich. He had done nothing wrong and he had never lied, but it was the Lord who decided to crush him and make him suffer. The Lord made his life a penalty offering, but he will still see his descendants and live a long life. Remember, descendants is like your family, further down in family. So like your children's children, descendants. He will complete the things the Lord wants him to do. After his soul suffers many things, he will see life and be satisfied. My good servant will make many people right with God. He will carry away their sins. For this reason, I will make him a great man among people, and he will share in all things for those who are strong. He willingly gave his life and was treated like a criminal, but he carried away the sins of many people and asked forgiveness for those who sinned. Okay, so that final bit is about his death. So he was led to death. He died because God would forgive everyone for their sins. People would, when Jesus died, people would realize their wrongdoing. They would realize how selfish they were being. And they would believe in Jesus and therefore change their ways to become kind and loving and follow the word of God and follow the 10 Commandments. Okay? So annotate now if you need to. Pause here. And now your task is to write down all the things a servant would have done in the middle. So what is a normal servant that you think about in our society? Well, we don't really have servants so much anymore, but in the olden days, what would a servant have done? Okay, write that in the middle. And then around the edge, I'd like you to write about the things that happened to Jesus. Okay, and maybe you can start seeing some links. So I'm going to talk about his resurrection now. You can pause on that video if you need to. And I want us to think about why Jesus resurrected. What does that show? What do Christians believe that his resurrection shows? Pause the video now and have a discussion. So his resurrection shows how powerful he was. Because God gave him these powers and he could resurrect, he could have chosen not to die if he wanted to, but he chose to die to be the ultimate sacrifice to repair the relationship between God and people. It also links with the idea of the afterlife. So it shows that there could be a heaven or hell. There is life after death, and Jesus showed that there is life after death. And it also shows that there is a consequence for behavior. So link this with justice as well. So there is a consequence for people doing bad things, going to hell, and doing good things, going to heaven, which is very comforting for Christians. So remember, his resurrection, people realized how powerful he was. They realized that he was real, that God's word was real. He was a part of God. God had given him powers. Therefore, they would believe in him. This is when Christianity became a thing. People then followed God. They became Christians. They changed their ways. They become kind and loving. So have a think now about ideas of resurrection and his death. How could you represent Jesus' reasons for his death and resurrection? So quite often we see a cross because that is a symbol of Jesus dying on the cross. So just to finish off, write some words about Jesus' death and resurrection and what that means for Christians, why his resurrection is important for Christians, and how can you represent Jesus' reasons for his death and resurrection. And that's it for today, and I will see you at 1:15, okay?